All right, folks, we're going to talk about the sound of innovation, blending acoustics and architecture in modern design. The intersection of acoustics, audio, and architecture provides grounds for innovation, of course, and understanding the relationship between space and sound is essential, not only in terms of the physical dimensions, but also in the ways we utilize these spaces through the auditory information they provide. Now, to discuss all of that, insights and other things, and to introduce the panel, would you please welcome from Prismatic Group, Stacey Kempton. Hi, Stacey.
Hello. How you all doing? Well, that's very polite clapping. Oh, it's Friday. You guys should be like really into it. We're nearly done. So we've got an amazing panel here that, yes, are going to talk about acoustics and architecture and how it all blends in together. So I might get you guys to introduce yourself starting at this end, please.
Sure, yeah. I'm Gareth Davis. I'm Consultant Liaison Global Lead for Acoustics. I've kind of been on the trenches, or in the trenches, kind of on a number of fronts, really, as part of this conversation. So I've been a touring front of house engineer. I've been an acoustic consultant. I work for a loudspeaker manufacturer, both on the R&D side and now kind of in the application side. So I've been on in the conversation about how we treat acoustics in architecture from both kind of very much on the consultancy front, but also how then we bring technology into that and bring that into the conversation and where that happens.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Glenn Humphreys. I currently work for Amber Technology Australia as a system designer and engineer. In my previous role, I was the global head of sound for deluxe post-production, so for delivery and everything else, and that encompassed theatrical, home delivery, home entertainment and everything. That encompassed building dub stages, TV mix stages, and also screening rooms across the sort of spectrum, and also not only building them from scratch, but also retrofitting spaces and also spinning up spaces that really weren't meant to be, reproduction environments.
Hi everyone, my name's Alec. I'm with Oricon. I'm an AV consultant there. I've probably spent the last 20 years in mostly design roles. Before that, I worked in AV as an operator or a service technician and various other roles, including install. So I sort of feel like I've had a little bit of everything. My passion, though, is really in audio and also the auditory experience and kind of the intersection of those two things. So yeah, that's about me.
Yesterday, I was actually on in the panel we were talking about education and pathways to this industry, and I was the only one who came from a live production background, and ended up I'm only just getting into installs of this nature, normally just theatres and things. So I'd actually love to ask what your pathway was, if you did any study along the way to get to where you are today.
Yes, I have a degree in sound technology. That got me into working in recording studios, which then eventually, by way of the record label, pushed me out onto the road to actually be a touring engineer. Then to get off the road, I went back into academia and have a master's in architectural acoustics, which then led me into consultancy. So I think education certainly opened a few doors for me and kind of changed the way I could kind of move my career and kind of what I wanted to do with that. Yeah.
Mine was very similar. It was just music technology, and then a master's in post, and then a master's in research, which took the form of acoustic spaces and also mixing in those spaces.
Yeah, mine was a bit of a winding trail through experience on the job. I did some electronics and a science degree, but I was working part-time operating shows at the university theatre and mixing for the band nights. Eventually, after a couple of years, I did my advanced certificate in sound production, came back to my science degree, finished that, and then I've just done various industry certs, AVIXA, CTSD, and various others from vendors. Right through really, depending on what knowledge areas I needed to sort of sharpen up. So that's sort of what's brought me here.
Wonderful. And now everything we have to know where we've come from to know where we're going. So can you guys talk a bit about how, particularly having come from live sound type backgrounds and things like that, how did we end up in this integrator space acoustically? Where are we headed? How's the technology evolved to where we are now?
I'd like to frame it as egg crates to excellence. You know, you think of that traditional thing of anyone's sort of first acoustic treatment is to stick egg crates on the wall. And I've seen it in environments. You want to now get into a position where you're designing for the space, or you're making the right sort of sacrifices to make sure that you can have an acoustically correct space that fits into the design if you're not part of the conversation early. But I think, as we were saying, talking before, is that it's all about, no matter what the project is making sure you're in the conversation early, because you're able to make really strategic decisions along the way that not only save money, but save time and also a lot of stress. If you're able to be involved very early, no matter what the project is, because it's easier to get it done then than it is trying to solve a problem when there's a sound system involved and that sort of thing. I think that's really important. I think that's main thing is as early as you can be.
Yeah, I certainly can relate to that question. I sort of feel like it's been a journey for me from just trying to, I guess, get a band working on stage, just try and manage the gain before feedback, get the levels right, and the most basic conditions conducive to reproducing the sound. But I guess as I've developed and as the industry's developed, we're aspiring to greater heights, and that's just the baseline really from where we start now. Now we're trying to get to spectral balance, intelligibility, and the right amount of natural or even artificial reverberance in the space, and really do a bit more than just reproduce what's on the stage, really create that experience for the audience, or for, it doesn't necessarily have to be an audience, but whoever's in the space.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with everything that's said really there. And it's kind of defining that sort of sound signature within the space and really understanding what the applications are. A lot of spaces are now being designed for kind of multi-purpose uses, and it's, which acoustic environment do you actually design for there? If you have, let's say, an orchestra playing, on one evening within the space, but then you have speech for the next night, and for speech, you want to keep the reverberation time low to really sort of drive up that intelligibility, but then that doesn't support an orchestra, for instance. At Acoustics, we're very much looking at kind of active acoustics in terms of how can we really support that in terms of multiple applications within the space, being able to change and define the sound signature within the space by using regenerative microphone arrays and pulling that into a process within the space to actually then change the reverberation time within that space. So yeah, things are really kind of moving on in terms of how we're able to control the space, but ultimately it comes down to that initial acoustic design and where do you kind of focus your attention there? Which application do you actually design for? And that's a conversation that you really want to be in very early, because I've seen that people get that wrong at very early stages.
So we were just talking a lot about spaces. Which spaces are your personal specialties? Like we've heard a lot about Microsoft Teams in tiny rooms with their spatial technology and all sorts of things over the last 2 days. But what sort of are you guys working more in those education spaces, theatre spaces? What are you guys specialising in when you're doing acoustic design?
Oh, well, speaking for myself, I spent a lot of years with AV integrators as a solutions architect or a systems engineer, and a lot of that was education and also corporate boardrooms and meeting rooms, seminar rooms. So that was sort of our bread and butter. In more recent years, as a consultant, I find I'm doing all sorts of different spaces, occasionally performance spaces, but also sports stadiums, train stations, airports, outdoor cultural centres. A real huge variety. So. That's me.
For me, it's really widespread at the moment. It's everything from sort of small education through to larger universities, including Dolby Atmos design for a couple of universities, all the way through to commercial environments. Yeah, it's pretty a wide gamut of things we get called on to design for at Amber.
Yeah, I'd very much echo that. Theatre, performance art spaces, but again, yeah, stadiums, arenas, you know, and really that scale as well, right down to kind of high-end resi and kind of the small kind of installation side as well. So yeah, really right across the board in terms of the verticals that we're working in and what we're designing for. You know.
How do you find those spaces different? And I'm guessing the budgets associated with them. Like you were talking about how we can play more with architecture and things like that. And it's not just about the audio system itself. How do you find those spaces different and the challenges in them?
I think when projects scale up, I think that you immediately have more sort of consultancies involved in the process, and ultimately you will bring in an acoustic consultant, which doesn't necessarily happen across the board because you don't necessarily have the budget when kind of you're looking at smaller scale projects. So your large kind of multidisciplinary projects where you have a number of consultants, you have a main architect to kind of have to work with as well. Then our scope as loudspeaker system designers changes in terms of how we kind of navigate that. Who it is that we're having those conversations with. We have to work very closely with the acoustician. But at the same time, is the architect driving the conversation in terms of how we integrate the technology into their space? Because they've sold the client on this vision, on this concept, on this kind of this dream almost. These perfect CGI renders that don't involve any technology. You don't see the speakers, you don't see the cable trays, you don't see the rack rooms. They're not there. And everything that happens beyond that is a compromise to the client. And so a lot of the conversations we have is expectation management in terms of, okay, so you've seen this beautiful, sleek design. Now we are going to stick loudspeakers there, and this is why we have to do this. And this is how we can integrate them. Can we flush mount loudspeakers into the walls? What does that look like? And then we've got to have conversations with fire engineers, with structures, with facades, and then you're working right across the board in terms of the stakeholders that you've got to manage across that program. And that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. It's stakeholder management.
It really, it's so parallel. It's frightening. It really is. It doesn't. It's nearly identical. My experience is that real stakeholder management and making sure that everything's covered and that the client's vision, their original vision, is still there and it will still serve its purpose for what they want, because ultimately it comes down to that. You're spot on. Absolutely.
I also feel it's a bit about the maturity of that team. That's the architectural team as well as the client and some key stakeholders. Just how deeply they involve all the specialist disciplines early in the project, and often that comes with the scale of the project too. And if they're engaging the AV consultant, the acoustic consultant, and the other specialist trades early, they can sort of have a big impact on the design before it's a long way down the road. Once you're at 60, 70, 80% design, it's getting too late to change the shape of the building because it's already been set. So I find that maturity has a big part to play. Some clients are very mature and they've got in-house expert teams who have input into those processes very early. Some of the big universities are like that. But yeah, that's probably the biggest trade-off. It's a little bit the same as what you were both saying.
Yeah. And I think, to some degree, the architectural practices have evolved certainly at the sort of the larger end, the sort of the larger scale ones. I mean, the likes of, Fosters and Partners, for instance, who have taken a certain level of acoustics in-house, where they will do a lot of R&D testing on facades, for instance, and wall build-ups and things like that, and really starting to try and understand what the impact of that is in their design and what they can use, what are the materials that they're able to use, what are the absorption coefficients, what are the kind of transmission losses that they're looking at, what are kind of, microperforated screens that they're kind of looking at to be able to put loudspeakers in behind.
That's right.
And I think people are educating themselves to a degree beyond the conversations maybe that we were having 10 years ago, where it was almost, claim ignorance kind of thing and be entirely guided by the acoustics team. I think that we've definitely moved on there for sure. It's not completely there, but I mean, the conversations are changing.
Yeah. And the developments in, the material science and the materials that are available now for that purpose have really come a long way, and also the tools to start getting an idea of what that space will sound like very early on, in the box before you even get on site is really important, I think.
Absolutely. I'm just going to take that just because obviously, at Acoustics, we're constantly sort of developing those tools to be able to validate the systems before we get on site. So we have Sound Vision, which is our acoustic modeling tool, allows us to be able to see how we expect the system to behave within a space, looking at sort of direct SPL within the space, so we can then render heat maps to show exactly what the levels will be right across the space, and a number of other parameters to kind of really dig deep into that. We've recently developed Sound Vision Connect, which is a cloud-based server which ultimately allows you to kind of share those models with the architect, but they don't necessarily need that kind of acoustic kind of experience. They don't even need to have Sound Vision kind of loaded up on their machine. They're able to kind of click a link and actually be able to then navigate through the model and be able to see kind of your basic SPL renders to understand what the acoustics are doing in that space. But then I think most powerful tools that I've used really is around auralization. And I think in sort of the last session we talked kind of about binaural rendering out of spaces and being able to kind of move through spaces. We're certainly sort of working, a lot with that in terms of how we're able to kind of hear the space before we get into the space. We've got a recent partnership with Treble Technologies. I don't know if anyone's kind of aware of that in terms of kind of how we're then moving on in terms of how we're able to actually model and simulate the space using much more complex algorithms in terms of being able to model sort of low frequency within the space using wave propagation algorithms, kind of a hybrid kind of engine between the traditional ray tracing that the likes of EASE will use, and then using the wave propagation to be able to then really get a sense of exactly how the sound will behave in that space, and then be able then to auralize that as well. So you're getting a much more high resolution kind of render and really understanding, again, what sort of the low frequencies are doing in that space. So things are moving on very, very quickly, and they haven't for a long time. Yeah. I mean, anyone who's kind of used EASE will know that it still looks very much like it was kind of built 20 years ago. But EASE 5 recently has been released, and that's jumped on a long, long way. And now we're kind of moving on again to making sure that kind of the user interfaces are much, much better. They're more accessible to a wider kind of range of people, which takes it from being just the acousticians that are using these things to actually the integrators that are going to be able to kind of use relatively complex acoustic modeling to be able to validate the systems in the space.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think especially with the maturity of clients and the evolution of those teams to have a greater awareness of acoustics and audio early in the life cycle, there's even getting to the stage now where large sports stadiums will go through a process of measuring and documenting and analysing their existing facilities before they even look at upgrading to try and get a baseline metric and find out which facilities are performing well and how. So doing that acoustic analysis first, and that feeds into the whole modelling right from the get-go for much more accurate results.
A big thing for us at Amber is we're lucky that we work across multiple platforms in multiple environments, and we're able to use a suite of different tools, including the ones that Gareth mentioned. But the big thing for us is dialogue intelligibility. It really is the anchor for everything in our work at the moment. So although there's music and multi-application, it all comes down to dial intelligibility. And just quickly on that, I'd been away from Australia for quite a period of time, and coming back, and I know this is going to sound terrible from someone from my background, but the most impressive acoustic space I've heard in Sydney is one of the metro stations. It is the way it just you sort of go from the mayhem of the city to sort of that calm of the metro, and the train just arrived. It's the work. I don't know who did it. I've got no skin in the game, but the work was phenomenal. Like you walk in there, and no matter what time of day or night, there are people just speaking quietly, because it just brings that energy down. And it's really, I think, you're able to hear the announcements, and they're not deafeningly loud when the train arrives. It's oh, okay, I'm here.
Which station was that, Glenn?
It's the three city ones.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
And
really impressive.
I wanted to ask you. You mentioned intelligibility. Do you measure the STI?
Absolutely,
These
yeah, steeper all
and,
day.
And what kind of STI would you want to be seeing?
It depends on the space and what the requirements are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's always measuring that.
Yeah, I mean, for taking stations, for example, I mean, you'll have a mandatory requirement to meet 0.5 if you can justify it being an acoustically difficult space, let's say, then you could probably get away with 0.45, with maybe a 0.35 minimum. Again, it depends on kind of the background noise spectrum that you're modeling against as well.
It's a pretty low bar, isn't it? Down there.
It is. But I mean, I guess, in train stations, it's always very difficult to actually meet that. But in a theatre, for instance, obviously that is a very low bar. So it's completely, what is the acoustic environment that you're actually, trying to achieve these intelligibility levels. And I think 0.5 is actually quite reasonable when you have those really high background noise levels and relatively high reverberation times. So, I mean, when it's well designed and you're actually able to put that acoustic treatment in, but certainly in sort of transport hubs, then the amount of times that the acoustic treatment will get cost engineered out at late stages, and you have this low RT that you think you're working with, and all of a sudden that goes away very quickly, because the maintenance around that is very difficult. There's only certain places that you can put acoustic treatment because of that. So you can't put any acoustic treatment in the roof above the tracks, for instance, because you can't access it to clean it and things like this. So there's lots of difficulties really when working in those particular environments. I did a lot of work for high-speed rail when I was working for WSP as an acoustic consultant. So, that's the only reason I'm talking about that, really.
Yeah, it's a terrible shame when that happens late in a project. But I feel like architects and the stakeholders are starting to understand. Well, my perspective is the architecture is not just about the visual aspect, but there's the auditory experience as well. And that's a massive part of your experience, and achieving that level of comfort and achieving the functionality of a space, that ties right into the acoustic properties of the space and also the PA system, of course. But the acoustic properties, like the reverb time and intelligibility is more on the PA side, but the reverb time is going to kill your intelligibility, and there's no workaround for that other than putting earbuds in your ears. Sort of trying to keep that front of mind for architects and the stakeholders who it's their money, at the end of the day. And really, they do want a good experience. They want a good environment where people aren't stressed and they don't have to yell at each other to communicate, and it's not so quiet that that they feel uncomfortable speaking to their friend because the whole room can hear it. Sort of tailoring that environment is that's core for architects, and I think they all realise that.
And as soon as you bring voice alarm into that conversation, you have mandatory requirements to be able to open your venue. So you have to be able to hit those. And again, that's the constant battle with the architects to get that message across in the fact that, you know, we have to be able to hit these mandatory targets, you know, that are, you know, they're in the standards for everyone to see. But again, it's still a battle. Yeah.
The ironic thing about that, though, is that quite often, if it's an evacuation system or a life safety system, it becomes an exercise of standards compliance, ticking the box, and you know, there's rather than achieving a certain outcome for the listeners, and quite often there's at least one little loophole where they can. But based on if it's a long reverberation time, I think they might have revised this in the latest NCC, but if there's a long reverberation time, they can get away with a certain low STI without even trying to hit that mark.
Yeah,
do you remember
say
that?
That sort of acoustically hostile space. Yeah, yeah. It's always the get out of jail card that you can play. Yeah, yeah. Get a concession for that.
Did they get rid of that in NCC 22? I think so. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting off track there.
Okay. No, I was loving all the passion just then, but I do want to take it back a step because there might be some people in the room that have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, I work at the lower end of the budget, so software would be nice, but instead I'm instinctive and, you know, still dealing with those school halls from, you know, back during, was it the global financial crisis where we built some fantastic school halls that cost a fortune and acoustically were a nightmare. So that's where I come from, but you guys are talking about all these fancy things. So I kind of had a few questions within there. You talked more like metro stations, and yes, well, there is an address system in there for announcements and things. I mean, I'm so glad that I accidentally didn't catch the normal train and catch the metro this morning. So I know what you're talking about. There's sandstone in there. And I'm looking at that going, so software's come a long way from you have 3 different materials, I'm guessing, that you can choose from, to it can model with the materials in the space. And you guys are now starting to look more at the architecture. It's less about the PA system and more about, it sounds like you're actually getting involved in what materials are used, the acoustic treatment that's being put in there and stuff.
Very much.
The role's evolving. So I guess, can you talk a bit about how the software's evolved, its price point as well, where it sits, and also and how accessible it is, because you mentioned that, but also, how your roles have evolved.
Yeah, I mean, as a loudspeaker manufacturer, we've got to be a little bit careful, really, in terms of how we engage in that conversation, because obviously we are not acoustic consultants. You know, we are not taking on the liability for acoustic design within the space. Although we can influence that conversation and we can say, if you want to be able to support our loudspeaker design, then ultimately, you know, this is probably what we would recommend. But ultimately, we will leave that to the acoustic consultant to make those decisions. But it's about education. It's about being involved in the conversation early. It's about understanding what you do need in terms of the acoustic signature of the room to be able to support the system that you have. You know, whether that is a voice alarm system, whether that's an immersive system, for instance, you know, whether you're likely to be supporting, you know, like say an orchestra or speech, and just understanding what it is that you actually need to have in terms of that acoustic design to be able to do that. And a lot of the time, you know, we will only be talking with the AV designer. So there will be kind of a secondary system designer that ultimately we are just guiding as a loudspeaker manufacturer. And I think it's becoming more and more common for a consultant to take on the design of the audio system as well as doing the room acoustics, because those two things are so, you know, tightly kind of integrated together that it makes sense to have that kind of sort of package, really. Whereas I think before, people didn't want that level of liability. It was kind of like, well, we'll design the room acoustic, they can design the speaker system, and if for whatever reason it doesn't work, we can point fingers like that. And that seemed to happen a lot, you know, who's actually kind of responsible for this, kind of the final performance of the system. I mean, the client doesn't win at the end of that, you know, and there's been a number of historical cases where, you know, that people have ended up in court over those kind of lack of communication between those two disciplines. And now I think people are taking responsibility and wanting to offer a better service to their clients by being able to offer, you know, both of those and actually standing up for the design that they're putting forward. Yeah,
I'll pick it up from the middle of Gareth's point, which is the remediation side, which is a lot of our business, is when you go into that environment, is measure the democratization of the tools has come a really long way. The price point, was astronomical. Just a few years ago, but there's now a couple of options where you can subscribe in or anything like that. But I'll take it from the remediation point is metering and monitoring, and then mapping that environment where it exists now. If you're having to go into a place that you need to remediate and make right, from probably a court case or something like that, or a historical issue that's been there and they've now got budget, is once you have that sort of measurement, like use whatever you choose, but I use the NTI sort of stuff for that. And then from that data, you can really create some pretty rich models around, the materials that you can then integrate and then start to get heat maps, which I think are really good as, sort of an existing and then, the predictive sort of heat map. And then that's sort of the client side, whether it's, resi all the way up to sort of high-end stuff. But then you've got sort of all the other tools at your disposal to be able to sort of, design your way out of that problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. I certainly think that the tools are evolving, and especially with Ease 5, it's more accessible. They've got a subscription model as well, and it's just easier to use, so more people can take it up. And I feel it's more than just those modelling packages. There's more on the market as well. I must point out. Are not just a measurement or modelling for the purpose of the person doing it. It's also a great communication tool to be able to reflect back early in design. Hey, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is why. And it's not just a single outcome intelligibility. It might be uniformity of coverage, or you might be wanting to have a certain amount of, time before reflections are hitting the stage. For example, like you might want to have a reverberant stage, which is quite live, so performers can hear each other and hear themselves, which gives them the confidence to perform. But you've got to also keep that RT down so that it's not muddying the sound for the audience. So it's a lot of factors interplaying, and to be able to communicate that to people who aren't specialists in that area is so crucial in basically getting buy-in to that conversation, and why do we want to shape the walls in this way or add these certain materials. It's sort of almost before actually the PA goes in. That's sort of the last part in a way.
Yeah, I think it's really important for anyone starting out in this sort of space, or not in this space, but in this sort of discipline, is to, no matter what tools you use, is to start developing your own library of your measurements and also your data, so that you can refer back to it. And that's one thing that's really helped me throughout, sort of problem solving, and whether it's remediation or design from scratch, is looking back at those historical issues or those builds from very early on in the piece. And it doesn't matter how sort of archaic or basic and unstructured that data is. It's that you've got it there to refer back to, and it can really help you out of some tight.
Yeah, it's not freely available either. You can't find that stuff on the internet. How loud is a metro station with 400 people in it? Is that 70 dB, 80 dB? Who knows?
Yeah.
And how much does that depend on the treatment? Or these kind of conversations, if we can bring them forward and say, based on past experience and measurements, this is the outcome, then it makes a much stronger case for spending that extra X amount, which might not be huge in the overall project scope, but if people understand how much it influences the actual user experience every day for the lifetime of that project, then it's a different conversation.
It also builds your argument if you're going in to really pitch for something that you believe will assist. If you can show a historical case in that it performed in that way, or it corrected that issue, it really does help get it to that point. So you have both the tools at your disposal plus the data, and then you've got a real case to take to the client or the architect or the whoever you need to convince to make it right in your eyes.
You've talked about having the data and things, and we've been talking about the metro stations. Now, they were relatively new for Sydney at some point, and now we've got a bunch of them so we can get data. But if you guys are working on a project that's a relatively new concept for here or something that's just new to you, is there a lot of work across the field rather than being competitors, instead more collaborative? If you know someone overseas or here in Australia has done a similar project, are you sharing data? And is that something we should be looking at if you're not?
I have a great relationship with sort of people in a lot of countries, and we always, if it's a trusted partner, you always share. And the thing is, you end up becoming a circle of sort of friends anyway, and so you sort of start talking about acoustic problems and that sort of thing. So it sort of evolves, but it would be great to the same way they sort of did back, you said you were mixing back when they did with reverbs back in the sort of 90s and early 2000s with impulse response reverbs, is people kept them tucked away like they were a secret. But when you started sharing those and people started to understand spaces better, it really brought the entire discipline up.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's just one example, of course, the metro stations. But I got to say, in my experience in Australia, there's a lot of, maybe because we're a small market, I spent a lot of years working with the integrators, and that kind of information is very tightly held. There's not much collaboration. It's very competitive, and there's a sense of that even in the consulting community as well. I think like one consultant's unlikely to share their information with another. Maybe if those personal connections are established over the years, it breaks down some of those walls, but they're very tightly held in those communities, I'd say. I've had some exposure to AV in the States, and I feel it's much more open. And it's because, in my opinion, it's because there might be 100 companies in the States. So really, it's not a one-on-one battle. Whereas if you've got half a dozen or 10 big integrators in Australia, all fighting for a small number of jobs, it sort of almost does get down to a dog-eat-dog situation. I mean, I hate to categorise it that way, but yeah, from time to time it does.
I think you're right, because my experience is the opposite. Is that it's really been not in Australia but overseas, was that it was very much if you were working on something, you could always pull in someone, and also I was asked to go and help with things. It was a lot more collaborative, and I guess it was from the economies of scale that Alec mentioned.
More so overseas,
yeah, very much so.
Yeah, but not so much here in Australia. No. Yeah, that's my experience too.
I mean, I think at Acoustics we have the benefit of being a global company, and we are doing projects all over the world all of the time. We are constantly commissioning systems, calibrating systems. We have an awful lot of data to draw from. My role as kind of the global consultant liaison lead is to manage kind of relationships with consultancies all over the world, and big multidisciplinary consultancies who have offices all over the world, and we're constantly engaging in their projects there. So there's a lot of kind of best practice sharing that happens for us to be able to give the best support to those consultancies on a global scale. Then we pull from their best practice, and a lot of the time that they're kind of happy to share that as well with us, because it benefits them and the projects they're doing in their different offices globally. So yeah, I think we're in quite a advantageous position in terms of being able to do that, and we have a very large kind of database to be able to pull from, and it's kind of how we use that information to really make sure that kind of system designs we do are kind of the most optimized they can be for that particular application.
A big pinch point that you guys have mentioned and has been mentioned in previous sessions as well is not being included early enough. So how do we change that as an industry? Do we, as an industry, go out to the universities that are teaching architecture and say, hey, we're important, try and get a unit put in those courses? Do we, do a public campaign, that's not really going to work. But you know what I mean, like that sort of thing. Publishing in architecture magazines. What do we do to improve the knowledge of these people we have to work with, so that they get us in earlier, but also they understand the importance of us and what we do, and including us in the design, like where they've put a wall there and then they want flush mounted and you can't do it because there's no space behind. Anyway, those sorts of, how do we avoid those problems?
I'm going to take that one because I've sort of seen it in multiple sort of different, from different viewpoints. And I think if you're, as we all are, we're passionate about, sound, no matter at what level it is you should insert yourself, and sort of, you don't have to be sort of forthright about it. But I think that by explaining the reasons why early on and putting a dollar figure on it, like if you've got that experience, is put a dollar figure on what it costs to fix that space or what it's going to cost to build, recreate that space. It can get people's attention very early. And if you show the savings in the next column by doing that early, you will start to find that you are pulled in. It will take time, no matter who you're dealing with. But if you start to do that and you have the data to back it up, you will find that you're in your circle of clients or people that you deal with, you will be brought into the conversation earlier. And that's what I'm starting to find now for myself.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Partly, I feel like the architect is the avenue to get into that conversation. They're always engaged very early in the project, and they have that one-on-one conversation quite often with the end client, and they have to be across all disciplines. So it's not like they have a specific. They kind of lean on all disciplines, which means they're usually listening to those disciplines as well. I really feel like we could do more here. It's we're not quite there yet. I'd like to see a situation where we could, let's say it's a university that has 100 lecture theatres, where they would engage acoustic consultants to, let's say, measure the lecture theatres and provide a score. How does this perform? I mean,
That's a great idea.
it ties right into the student outcomes, which is what it's all about. The whole institution is trying to maybe keep more people in the lecture theatre, give them a good learning experience, keep more people in the uni courses. I mean, it's core business in that scenario.
That's a great idea. And I was just going to add to what Alec was saying, which is, you have to be your own advocate, as a sort of sound community. I think that's really important. If you sort of support it and believe in it, is advocate for the importance of it and back it up.
I mean, yeah, we have a whole kind of outreach program and education program, specifically geared towards consultants, whether that be kind of lunch and learn sessions, where we'll go in and talk about a very kind of specific part of the technology, or look at a solution for a project that they're currently working on. Again, sort of similar thing with kind of masterclasses. And there's a whole syllabus that we've kind of built around that in terms of how we kind of educate. We actually have partnerships with educational institutes as well, where we will send people from our education team out to talk to students and kind of bring them in early into that conversation. And I think if we can educate the consultants, then they can basically be our voice at the table for when they initially talk to the architect, because they'll get brought into that conversation earlier than the manufacturers will, because you've got to stay relatively independent in that first sort of concept stage, and you're not necessarily bringing all of the manufacturers to the table because you haven't ultimately decided which manufacturer you're going to be using. So as an independent consultant, if we can make sure that we can remove the barriers for them to be able to kind of be an advocate for us, and that's generally through education, then that's only going to benefit us in that kind of early design stage, because they will talk about the technology that we've used. They will understand. We'll bring case studies to them, so they'll understand kind of where we've used these solutions before, why it solves the problem for the architect, and they can come up with some really sort of clear arguments for us as kind of why they should use us as opposed to anyone else. Then that's kind of what our goal, really, I suppose, as far as doing that. And it makes things easier further down the line for us as well, because they've had those conversations early. So when we come into the conversation, then people are up to speed pretty quickly, and it makes our job a lot easier.
Is that L-Acoustics information available publicly? If at a lower level, are people able to access case studies or anything like that? And I'm not
Yes.
advocating for L-Acoustics. I'm brand agnostic, but yeah, is that sort of available to people, that sort of education, or is that sort of
Absolutely.
very much okay?
No,
great.
very much so. I mean, there's a whole kind of education and training syllabus that is available to anyone who wants to kind of sign up for the courses.
That's brilliant.
With consultants, we actually give them free access to those courses. So that's another barrier that we kind of break down for them, which isn't the case across the industry, but particularly for consultants, because we know that they will bring us into those conversations, and ultimately, they will bring us into those projects. Yeah.
What kind of things are in that training? Is that based on understanding the product lines, or is it a bit broader about acoustics and architectural acoustics, electroacoustics?
Very much kind of both of those things. So it will be from how to use our acoustic modeling tools to the theory behind line array technology, for instance, and really understanding kind of the theory behind that. So when they're actually designing, they understand the acoustics behind what it is that they're doing, for sure. So you can go from very kind of early kind of entry stage to really quite advanced acoustics, and we do right across that in terms of the education pieces that we do.
Do you see many? Is it mostly people who are deploying these systems who are doing the training? Like I guess partners or agents who are actually doing the installs, or consultants, or
varies. We do see a lot of integrators. We see freelance engineers, system engineers turning up, system engineers that are working for rental houses. But then at the same time, as far as from my side, then we specifically focus on the consultant market, and all of our consultant managers across the globe are ultimately doing that and focusing in on kind of workshops and education pieces there.
I think that helps also with the defining the language and also the terminology really early in the piece, is that if the client or the architect or anyone else involved in the process is starting to understand that material, is when you're referring to different terminologies or references, is that they're all aligned, so that you're not going one way and they're believing it's the other because of a misunderstanding.
Absolutely. We are actually running out of time. So in just
I could
very
go all
briefly.
day with this.
Yeah, well, you guys are passionate. I love it. But just really briefly, I was going to ask each of you for like the most interesting project. So it could be a horror story, it could be a great story, the weirdest story, I don't know. But just a brief summary of the case study, I guess, that intrigues you the most from your history.
I'll start with that one. That one's easy. The proudest project I think I worked on was attaining Dolby Premiere status for a dub theatre, because it really is the pinnacle of achievement. It wasn't just me; it was a massive team, but being able to get to that level, knowing what the challenges were, really was fulfilling. It was amazing, incredible experience. The spec is written for a reason, and that's to make sure that that theatrical listening experience is the absolute best it can be. The immersive one takes it another step, but the budgets just aren't there anymore to do that. But personally, from another point of view, was one we were talking about earlier, which was a retrofit of a hotel room in Cannes for an Australian director at the very last hour of trying to do a theatrical screening that was Dolby certified in a massive hotel suite. That was fun. It was just ridiculous. Like something you'd never ever get the experience to do again, and make sure it hit the mark so they could walk away confident, because they just lost all confidence at the 12th hour and they were in crisis mode. So they were throwing money at it. And that was amazing. And to be able to get that right was another sort of fulfilling experience. And it was just using, that was after doing the Premiere certification, was just using every tool in the box and making sure it was available, the whole time to be able to make that work, and calling on manufacturers and those sort of people to do things in a really compressed and quite stressful environment.
I'd say that sounds intense. Well, I'm glad it's on your good experiences list at the end of the day. One of the ones that's maybe the most engaging and interesting for me, I'm working on at the moment, which is a performance area where we're very early in the design, but we're actually got some very close collaboration with the architect, the acoustic engineer, and myself around actually the shape of the stage and the shape of the venue. So we haven't even gotten to materials really yet, but we're just trying to establish the shape, which is fantastic to be involved that early in the project. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one coming to fruition.
I think probably the one that stands out for me that I had nothing to do with in terms of the design, being relatively new to acoustics, is ABBA Voyage. I went to see that within the first few weeks of starting at the company, and yeah, it was incredible. Yeah, the technology really blew me away in there. And so you've got a bespoke auditorium, actually purely designed for that experience. There's a lot of things to consider on the acoustics there because you're right near the railway there. So you've got noise, like egress to consider, ingress to consider into the space. So a lot of work was done there in terms of being able to reduce the kind of the transmission into the room.
What was the venue? Sorry, Gareth.
ABBA Voyage.
ABBA
in
Voyage.
London, yeah. So that experience, so using holograms to actually make you believe that you are seeing ABBA live.
Okay.
Is that
And
Sydney?
no, that's in the UK, in London, in Stratford. And it's incredible, the subtleties that are used in terms of, there will be things like the microphone gets knocked, or things that make you believe that you're actually watching the band, and you'll be entirely convinced that you've seen ABBA actually play live at the end of this. There's a number of technologies that are happening as far as acoustics goes. There's the ELISA immersive technology that's happening in there, which gives you brilliant localization of all of the performers on stage, which gives you really good clarity in terms of the audio in that space. But they're also using ambience, which is the active acoustics. So when you first walk into the space, they're actually the RT is quite large, so it gives a real atmosphere of the space. There's a real buzz about it. But then, soon as the actual performance starts, they reduce the RT, so the clarity and the intelligibility goes up. There's moments in there where the crowd start singing Fernando, for instance, and again they change the RT within the space to change the atmosphere within the space, and it's all so subtle that if people didn't tell you that's what was happening, you wouldn't know. But the psychoacoustic effects of that are incredible in terms of how it kind of changes your perception of the space and kind of how that works. So a lot of technology happening there, really combining those technologies, and it was a really incredible experience.
Sounds great. I don't want to tell my wife.
All right, we really are running out of time. I'm going to get in trouble. But I will say, if you have an absolute burning question that is really going to be relevant to everyone, please put your hand up. We have time for one. Yeah, and then if anyone else has any other questions, I'm sure you guys, seeing as we've run out of time, would be happy to stay back
Absolutely.
for a minute. Thank you.
Michael, University of Sydney. This is a very, very, very important issue. So there's reverberation in an atrium or a corridor area for the emergency warning system, and then there's intelligibility for an actual lecture theatre, and they're different environments and different rules, I think, for this. And you mentioned the difficulty in getting people to engage you and follow this. It sounds like it's a little bit mandatory. It's not completely mandatory. It would be good if this actually was law and mandatory for theatre spaces. The universities need to be dragged into this. We see rooms that are designed really well, and then we see ones which are not. There's no acoustics at all. It needs to be compulsory for them. It needs to come from outside. There's constant cost cutting and things. Part of intelligibility is all of the different standards, but then you get somebody who's speaking in a second language. They've got a strong accent. You've got a long lecture with very long technical words, and that reverb comes back around near the end of the word, and you have two words which are similar. The students need to be able to have the intelligibility between the two. And then you get someone who's off mic, and that reverb, you can bump up the gain, but then the reverb comes back into the mic. So these are challenges. It would be good if there was a group of people who were pushing for this to become law, so that universities had to engage people like you in the designer spaces.
There is a law for new buildings and buildings that require like code verification. So when it comes time for your fire, when it comes time for your warning, being a public, if it's a public university, that will come about. And I can't remember what the cadences are, whether it's 3 or 5 years, but that would be the point where you can refer back to the code, and that's how you can.
Yeah, but like you say, in sort of auditoriums, for instance, and looking at non-native speakers, then there is a lot of sort of complexity there in terms of the intelligibility, and certainly, mic technique, for instance, it does change within that. The system has to be able to meet a certain speech intelligibility, or should do, and it's only a guideline, it's not mandatory. You're absolutely right in terms of if it isn't actually a voice alarm system, then it doesn't actually have to mandatory actually meet that. But in an education space, obviously, it's very beneficial for that because of listening fatigue. You will learn a lot better if that intelligibility is high and you don't have that level of fatigue, which means you generally switch off after quite short periods of time, or you're really struggling to concentrate within that space. And there is, a number of consultants that very much specialize within that area. And I think it's just about bringing those specialists into those spaces to ensure that you as an institute make sure you get the best learning experience for your students. I think rather than bringing it into into mandatory requirements and bringing it into legislation, I think there is a responsibility for the institute to ensure that that's the case.
They're cutting costs. But 3 weeks ago,
That's always going to be the case, though, isn't it?
UTS announced they're cutting 200 jobs or something. So they need to be forced and dragged into this. But look, the techs like us and you, they'll get up on the mic and speak up close and speak clearly. Testing in the real world, it's a lecturer who's mumbling and off mic.
But that's an education piece, I suppose, isn't it? In terms of kind of the AV engineers that you have on site, actually teaching people how to use the equipment properly.
There's several thousand.
Well, yeah, I suppose so, but you're never really going to be able to get around that. I mean, directional microphones that kind of improve that using certain compression
What
of
it
the
means is
microphone.
there's more need for that room reverb to drop down because of that requirement. So that's
Potentially, yeah.
That's another need for it.
Oh. Yeah, it sounds like you need to mobilise all your, your acoustics and your architectural lecturers and all of this, and maybe get them on board and get them to, yeah. But yeah, well, everywhere's cutting costs, unfortunately. I mean, whether we go to live and we've lost festivals, or whether we're dealing with education and issues and all sorts of other things. So yeah. But we have run out of time. Thank you guys for sharing your knowledge and with such passion. I really do appreciate the passion that was coming out. So can we please give a hand for our speakers?
And thanks.